We just finished the third quarter. We're up 17.5% for the quarter. Market's up 14%. Since then, we've dropped a bit. So as of today, it's October 3rd today. So we are up 14.3. The market's up 14. So we're outperforming by 30 basis points. The purpose of this episode is to give an overview of where we stand and how we think about the future, which is more important. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So we talk about a lot of things: literature, scientific papers, interviews, impressions, travel impressions. The life of a hedge fund manager encompasses a lot of potential sources of knowledge, and therefore it's pretty diverse. But we also have to talk about the daily business sometimes, the bread and butter. What is it we're actually invested in, and how do these stocks perform? Because that's what we do. We're public investors mainly. We have assets in non-public, we have money in non-public assets too, but our main positions are Tesla and Nvidia. So we are exposed to the stocks of these companies, and that is where we actually make our money. So we need to talk about this occasionally, not all the time. I don't think it's purposeful for a hedge fund manager to continuously talk about the positions every day. We do monitor our positions every day. Actually, we monitor them on a daily basis all the time. But that is not necessarily also a reason for talking about them all the time. But this is a good, I think it's a good occasion to talk about where we stand, maybe a little bit also where we stood about a year ago, which was the unveiling of the the Cybercab and the Robovan, and where we stand today, about 3 months after the launch of Robotaxi. This is not even a podcast. It's October 3rd, 2025. This is Krumdelco. For the year, we're up 14.3%. The market's up 14%. We're outperforming by 30 basis points. So first, where do we stand today? So let's start with Tesla, our largest position. The company is at a crossroads. We're in a relatively uncomfortable position right now where the fundamental business, which is the car sales, is less than exciting. And there are two very important factors that are contributing to a potential positive development of the company's performance and the stock. And that is, both are actually driven by the same, which is the AI, the real-world AI, the full self-driving suite, which can be monetized through selling the service to car owners, and then, of course, through Robotaxi and Cybercab. So what's not so good is the fundamental situation. So let's talk about the ugly first, or the bad, if you will. Maybe ugly, maybe bad. I don't think this is a good, bad, and ugly situation. It's just good and bad. So the bad is, I think we are unfortunately not in a situation where the Tesla sales are just growing organically because it's the best product in the market. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is competition in China. So the Chinese competition is holding back growth. Growth is still there. It's but very lackluster. It's a very competitive market. Lots of supply, price wars. Companies that shouldn't be existing are still around, in particular BYD, but others also. We consider Xiaomi the only competitor that potentially has a chance to compete with Tesla neck to neck on a long-term basis. We are actually planning a trip to China in the next few weeks, so we'll talk about that a lot more when we're there and after that. But as we stand right now, I think the tea leaves are lots of supply, pricing pressure, and no matter how good your product is, you have to you have to live with that because the supply is not so bad. It's very similar to the iPhone and all the other competitors type situation. We've always said that we think that if Tesla can get 20% market share of China, that is pretty good. And we don't think they should have 90% market share for various reasons, cultural reasons. We don't think that the Chinese competitors are way ahead of Tesla or anything like that. But the competition, again, the competition is there. It is unfortunately stronger than we thought a few years ago. If we take back to 2022, when the stock reached its all-time high, which now it has surpassed, but quite frankly, it's done barely anything since then. So for the last 3 years, we've kind of been treading water here. But what has changed is that the competitive landscape, unfortunately, has worsened. In China, it's the competition of Chinese EV manufacturers. Although the market is still growing, we have to deal with the competition. In the US, the problem is actually the lackluster adoption of EVs. The US has definitely, despite of itself, adopted EVs. The reason the US is not adopting EVs at the scale that we think it should is because we're an oil and gas country. There is some sort of resistance against electric vehicles, despite the fact that the Tesla car, on the two metrics that we care about the most, which is cost and user experience, on both of these two metrics, the Tesla outperforms every car in the market globally. Nevertheless, it's not able to grow at, let's say 30% or even more. It's actually barely growing. And that is partly because, again, the competition in China and also the lack of adoption of electric cars in the US. Now, there is growth of electric cars, but it's kind of, let's call it, I call this a Frankenstein growth. It's not an organic growth. It's the kind of growth where you have a little bit of growth because, GM is throwing some discounts at corporate fleets or its dealership. You have growth because the Germans are underpricing their cars, things like that. But there's no real growth. There's no actual demand for those products. There is actual demand for Tesla products, but it's not enough. And again, we thought that if you have these two matrices, we're using Jeff Bezos's idea that instead of predicting the future, how about we predict what's definitely not going to change in the future. And he said for the Amazon business, what's never going to change is people want more selection at lower price and higher quality, or faster delivery or something like that. And, that's never going to change. And the same, I think people will always want a lower cost car that has a better user experience. So if you can drive those vectors in the right direction, you will always have more demand. And that is actually true for Tesla, but it's just not growing at the pace that we thought. The last thing about demand is Europe. I think in Europe, we are looking at a convoluted situation of cultural resistance towards non-European products. We have political issues. But overall, still, the Tesla brand as a brand is growing. We compare Tesla in Europe to Starbucks. So you have two options. You have either Netflix or Starbucks. Netflix has been able to dominate the European market, regardless of national initiatives, Canal Plus in France, and the Germans and the Brits, and everybody's trying to have their own film industry and their own distribution and streaming industry and all of that. But Netflix has won. Everybody in Europe is using Netflix. That's not the case for Tesla. Unfortunately, Tesla is more like Starbucks, where we have it, it's there, and in certain markets very successful. But overall, it's not ubiquitous like it is in the US. The reason for that, again, cultural. You have pockets of high demand, Norway, Switzerland, Netherlands, certain cities, let's say, Lisbon. I've been to Lisbon, and I think it has pretty high penetration. So there is, convoluted factors. Again, for example, electricity is not as cheap as it should be. I mean, the actual retail electricity. So you're looking at almost equivalent costs. So the total cost of ownership are not as low as they should be. There's other things, but overall, again, to summarize, we just don't have the kind of demand that we thought we should have for Tesla. What's on the positive side, though, that we have finally delivered the real-world AI. It's there, the technology works. The Robotaxi is in the fleet, it's working. We expect unsupervised FSD, V14. We expect a ramp of Robotaxi and eventually Cybercab. So all of these things are coming, and that's a good thing. And we know the technology is working. So what's left now is deployment risk. That's the risk. It's not even manufacturing, actually. We believe that Tesla will be able to manufacture, robotaxis at scale. But the question now is a deployment question. So what does that mean? It means that can we actually deploy 10,000 robotaxis by the end of 2026 and 100,000 by the end of 2027, or maybe 500,000 or millions of those going forward? Can that happen? That is actually a more difficult problem than maybe a lot of people think. For example, first you have to deploy them in a safe way. But safety is pretty well organized, I would say. We're driving a Tesla all the time with a version 12 FSD. I have 5 or 6 robotaxi rides that I've done so far. All have been flawless. And what I mean with that is really the trust in the system. It's working. The technology is working. So now the question is, can we monetize it? Or more importantly, can we deploy it and monetize it? And I think deployment is not it's not to be underestimated. For example, when Netflix started globalizing the company, they had some deployment problems, and that's why they bet so much on what's called microservices, Kubernetes, and created what's one of the spin-offs now, Orcus, a company that built the Netflix coordinator. The reason I'm mentioning all these things is that even in a software product like Netflix, you had this problem of scaling up at scale, lots and lots of different services. In the case of Netflix, of course, it's movie streaming. Now, with Tesla, you have the same problem, right? You're scaling up lots and lots of cars that need to pick up people. So you have a network problem, an optimization problem, a safety problem, a coordination problem. You don't want too long wait times. You want efficient utilization of the fleet. These are difficult problems to solve. These are electrical engineering problems, mathematical problems, algorithmic problems, real-world AI problems. So there's a plethora of problems that need to be solved, and Tesla needs to solve those problems. So that's the risk that we see with Robotaxi and Cybercab. The difference, by the way, between Robotaxi and Cybercab is that the Robotaxi is the Model Ys that are driving around right now, and the Cybercab would be the dedicated Cybercab with a lower cost than the Robotaxi. So to summarize, what's positive about that is, of course, we have line of sight now of a technology which is ready to be deployed in the real world globally. The reason it's going to be deployed and it's going to succeed is because of the lower cost and the better user experience. Again, those two factors that we think will always drive demand, no matter how much people have a problem with Elon Musk's politics, or how much they, want to support their local brands, or whatever it is that they're trying to do, whatever ulterior motives they have. In the end, people are going to vote with their taste and their wallet. So this puts us now in a situation where we have sales which are less than exciting, let's call it like that. And on the other hand, we have this potential, and there is this, it's almost like two tectonic plates which are shifting, and that's why we have all these earthquakes, volatility in the stock, and we're going to have to live with this for a while right now. It is unfortunately not the way around. We decided to stick around with the company because the technology is working. I mean, that's really the reason why we're sticking around. Now, I just want to throw this in because the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And I can tell you the only reason we are comfortable sticking around is because we're doing a lot of work on the academic, on engineering side. We're trying to educate ourselves as much as we can in terms of where the science, where the engineering stands. We don't know exactly what Tesla is doing, but we have a very good sense for what's possible and what potentially is going on under the hood. And because of that, the probability that this can be deployed and executed is very high. In particular, the deployment risk, which is not negligible, has to be seen from partly from the history of Tesla, what they've done in the past. Although this is fairly new, deploying a large amount of embodied software around the world is definitely a never been done before type of thing. It requires network optimization, it requires safety optimization, it requires compute and memory and hardware, and generally just deployment as an operational problem. It's not negligible, but again, given that this is Tesla, it's a positive in a way that this is actually the moat. Humanoid robots, it would warrant its own episode, which might come in the near future. So to summarize the Tesla situation, again, two tectonic plates. One is shifting the wrong way, the other is shifting the right way, and therefore high volatility and risk with enormous amounts of upside. The fair value, we see that 550 will be sellers in the low 600s this year, and then sort of in the high 700s next year. And that's based on modeling and risk tolerance and risk reward and things along those lines. Just real quick about NVIDIA, not real quick because it's not important or anything, but I think we've spoken about NVIDIA enough on this podcast, so go back to episodes before about NVIDIA. But what's going on with NVIDIA in a nutshell is that we have, on the one hand, again, the tectonic shift, which is massive, massive demand for compute and memory and systems that can handle all of the AI infrastructure that is necessary. And on the negative side, we have two problems. One is competition, and the other is the risk of a bubble. Now, we think that there is certainly competition coming from everywhere, but in fact, that is not the risk. I think the main risk that NVIDIA faces is the what we call the internet bubble problem, which is that the infrastructure runs too far ahead of applications, or the carriage surpasses the horse. In other words, we have, well, no, that's a bad analogy because the horse is the infrastructure. So yeah, something like the horse runs away, the carriage stays, something like that. What we mean with that is we need more and more compute and memory, because it's compute time. It's not just compute. We can put as much compute as we want in a data center. If the data cannot be crunched simultaneously in a useful way, we just lose compute time. So compute time, which is kind of a function of memory and compute. So you could think of it like maybe it's a plane. It's not a linear thing, not just how much compute or how much memory, but it's kind of memory times compute or something like that, some integral. So that we need more and more of to produce the tokens that then produce the application. So this is literally a little bit like the horse that carries its own wagon and the wagon carries its own horse kind of thing. So it is a flywheel. It is therefore hard to visualize, because we Wall Street, traditional Wall Street people will look at this and just say, okay, there is, I don't know, JP Morgan is using AI this way and that way, and NVIDIA is producing the compute, and the model providers, whether it's Grok or OpenAI or whoever, is producing all the services, and then they're going to be used. That's not how it's going to work. What's going to work is that we're going to have massive investments in foundation models, which then will drive the usage, because they will come up with better and better AI, which will drive usage. And the usage will traditionally start always natively. So what I mean with that is eBay was the first big application of the internet because it was native to the internet. Without the internet, eBay would not have been possible. The same way here we see, agentic coding or things like what Cognition is doing, or Replit or Cursor. Those are, Copilot, GitHub Copilot, things like that. But then, Grok Hard, Grok Heavy, and that we're going to transition into a more agentic workflow space where we have people, models booking your vacation tickets and getting the refunds for your taxes and all of that. So it's going to grow. And then the big 800-pound gorilla is, of course, the real-world AI, where we are most invested in. The reason we are actually invested in both NVIDIA and Tesla is for real-world AI. So we think that that we have the deployment of software through real-world robots, and that is a new thing that has never been happened before. It's a much bigger market, much bigger world, much bigger impact. Therefore, also underpriced by Silicon Valley, underpriced by whoever you want to look at. That's kind of, in a nutshell, the bet that we're taking, but we also understand the risk, because real-world AI is a deployment risk. So we need to bet on companies that really understand deployment risk, and that is the key. So going forward, we're going to talk a lot more about deployment risk. So again, what we mean by deployment is to scale these robots up in markets so they can be monetized. That is the main risk. Thank you.